My name is Barbara Bolt. I am an NEF member. I was in NEF for like 2 years in 2017 and 18, and then I went away for a while. And I was very graciously invited to give a presentation summer before last on presentation skills. I'm a communication skills coach. And I was so warmly welcomed back by everyone that I decided to rejoin. So I've been a member for a year now, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'm honored to have been asked with Vibka to moderate this panel this evening. So I'm going to ask the panelists to each introduce themselves. You'll notice there are 3 people sitting here, and there are 4 people on the screen. We have one panelist who is in absentia this evening, and I will introduce him after they've introduced themselves. So Danny, take it away.
Cool. My name is Danny Ellis, the CEO and co-founder of SkySpecs. First up, real quick, show of hands. Who's heard of SkySpecs? Right, I don't need to explain a whole lot then. Yeah, so we're in our 13th year of existence. Headquarters is right down the road here, but we've since expanded quite globally. We're now the global leader in wind farm asset management, which is an interesting thing to say coming out of Ann Arbor, not necessarily the windiest place in the world, but short story is it was a spin out of the University of Michigan. We went through TechArb, we went through Spark, we went through TechStars, then the local Endeavor program, been through a lot of these kinds of programs, done a little bit with NEF in the past. But yeah, it's been a long journey, a lot of twists and turns that I'm happy to talk about today. My background, 2-time aerospace engineering graduate from the University of Michigan. We were also the winner of the, speaking of Blake and the business challenge, back then it was called the Michigan Clean Energy Venture Challenge. That was how we got into renewable energy. I'll just tell this here for the local audience, that's why we're in wind, was to qualify for that business competition. We knew nothing of wind, we didn't have any intention of going that direction, and an advisor in a room similar to this one here said, well, you guys would probably do pretty well if you were a renewable energy company. So I took stock pictures of turbines off the internet, put them in a pitch deck and said we were going to use a drone to inspect them, and we took first place, won 50 grand, and then used that money to go to a conference and learned there was a real problem there. So that's how we got into that. Anyway, that's a quick intro on me.
Thank you, Dan.
Tough to beat that one. Sherwin Pryor. I'm actually the co-founder, CEO of Commute. Commute does charging infrastructure for e-bikes and e-scooters, which are far more of those in the market than there are EV cars. Prior to that, though, I spent 8 years as a public company investor in micro-cap, small-cap growth equities. I then went off and started GM Ventures in 2010 as the first managing director. There are some other people saying they are, but they're not. It's me.
Set that record straight.
I don't do a lot of, interestingly, angel deals. Commute's actually the 3rd angel deal I've ever invested in. So most of my experience has been about 45 exits as an institutional investor, 45 deals, 15 exits, 3 technologies and GM products today. I'm really proud of that. So now I find myself on this side of the table asking myself why.
Okay. Okay, who knows Point Angels? I'm going to borrow from. All right, great. I don't have to explain that either. I did what Sherwin did, and I did what Danny did. I rebranded my last company as an IoT company and won an award that way. It was in medical device. So good on you. And when that company exited, I was sending out newsletters, and one of the investors who did not invest said, well, we'd still like to talk to you. I'm like, you're a little late. They're like, no, we want to talk to you, David, about taking some of that money that you just made selling your company and putting it back into Angels. So this was my getting inducted into Point Angels 5 years ago, and had the privilege of working with a former colleague of Sherwin's who was the founder of Point Angels until he got poached and is now at GM Ventures. So we used to add them to the ecosystem of incestuous recycling of talent.
Circular economy.
Exactly. It's the thank you, Tim. I'm totally using that now. Circular economy. So David Bloom, 2-time engineer, 13 ventures, 4 exits, 5 going concerns, 4 graceful wind downs, no unicorns, but no big craters either. And I started actually the Factotum Business Accelerator doing some angel work, but only doing it with our captive clients. And it wasn't until Point Angels that I started to sit on our side of the table and hear these pitches, which are, it's gratifying because, you know, we used to be them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Just so everybody's clear about what hat people are wearing this evening, Sherwin's actually going to wear 2 hats, but Danny is our survivor CEO. Sherwin is here with an institutional investor mentality, but also being a non-founder CEO, and you'll understand that better in a minute. And David is our angel investor perspective, if we can keep him just to that, because he has so much experience. It's incredible. So I'm going to introduce the gentleman in the middle here, Peter Deppy. You'll notice that Sherman and Peter have the same company name under them. That is because Sherman took Peter's place.
Sherwin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sherwin took the place of Peter. So Peter, he's a seasoned entrepreneur and innovator. He founded Commute, and where is Blake? He founded it while he was still a student at Kettering, so he was a student founder. He majored in electrical and mechanical engineering. Sherwin has already told us what Commute does. So it is the hubs for micromobility, the micromobility space. Peter ran the company as CEO for 5 years. And the reason he's on the panel is to tell us the emotional side of his story, because he has recently transitioned out. He went from CEO to CTO and then transitioned out pretty recently, just a couple months ago. He is still in the EV charging space, and he is still a member of the Commute board. So he's still involved with the company, and we're going to hear more about that. So we've got 2 sides of that story, which I think will be very interesting this evening. Peter's going to share his insights via an interview that I did with him a couple of weeks ago. So we'll just be hearing clips from Peter this evening. And actually, here's the first clip.
I originally felt that I would be the CEO till the end, whether that be an exit or, the unfortunate happens where we have to, close the business.
So that's Peter's voice, and we thought that was a really nice quote to start with because, yeah, it's on. This problem of do I stay or do I go is often something that a new founder doesn't even think about. They just figure, oh yeah, this is my business, I'll be there forever. And what's interesting about that is the king versus, what's the other word? Rich.
Should I be rich?
Yeah, should I be rich? Should I be wealthy or should I be king? That's the way it goes. And there are decisions that have to be made. So we're going to start out with asking the 2 investor gentlemen the question, and I have David starting this one. When considering an investment, how do you assess whether a founder is more motivated by the wealth or the remaining in control?
Barbara, easiest question you're going to pose us tonight because it's all over everything they do. There are some particular tells that you can tell typically with a first-time founder, but also with some founders who've been burned before, is they are obsessed with 51% on the cap table. That guy is a control freak and wants to sit in the chair till the end. Or you can see it the other way around where they're saying, I don't know why I started this. I don't know why I'm raising money because it's just going to increase my burden. I'm feeling like I'm crushed into a tiny pellet as it is. I cannot wait until you replace me. Rarely are there miscues in that particular determination. And if there is, you just ask them. You just say, where do you want to be in 5 years? Or you say, are there problems that are beyond your team's capability that you would need to bring? And you draw them out in the course of diligence because you're going to be on this ride with them for the next 5 years. And you want to get to know them a little bit.
There you go. Sherman, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, for me, I think what we don't do enough of is personal conversations. We get so quick into give me your pitch and deciding whether we like it or not that we miss the human element. I love to ask founders really upfront about themselves, what motivates them. I was having dinner once with these two founders of a startup called Yoshi, right? Yoshi was bringing the gas to you. And I just looked at him and said, how do you guys handle conflict? And they looked at each other and said, well, we never had conflict. And I said, you will. It's only a matter of time, right? But then you ask them, why did they do the business? And I completely agree with David. Once they get into this cap table, especially West Coast accelerator-based companies, they're just taught, you got to control the cap table, right? As we say, life is too short. You should probably move on, right? In the automotive land, where I really started in venture, everyone wants to be a supplier to the auto company until they start seeing all of the requirements, the indemnification, right? The reps and warranties. And then all of a sudden, they don't want to be a supplier anymore. They're happy to license you the technology. So, but you got to figure that out through conversation, not just give me the pitch and yes or no.
Excellent. So it's all about relationships. It's all about talking to people. Absolutely. So the next question's for Danny. We're going to get him in the conversation. At what point in the evolution of SkySpecs did you and your co-founders realize that bringing in outside investment could possibly mean a loss of control? And maybe you want to, your co-founder's story is pretty interesting, if you want to share a little of that too.
Yeah, sure. So we have kind of 5 co-founders, or what we consider to be 5 co-founders. This all started, I mean, it's a much deeper story. You can probably find it on YouTube, actually, because I've told it a lot. It started as a senior design. You know, so I was like looking for a cool project to work on, and I proposed to the aerospace department here to build drones, and they said, sure. It turned into a student project that we formed. That got me into grad school, turned into a grad school project. And we were about to all graduate and go get real jobs. And you know, the local, it was a Center for Entrepreneurship, had just started the year prior. And so they came to us and they were like, this is a cool project, you guys should make it a business. And we looked at them, we're like, we're not business students. Like, why you wouldn't even think that? And they said, well, that's the point of the incubator, is to teach you how to do that and how to do fundraising and all of that. And so we looked at each other, we said, all right, let's give it a year. And if nothing transpires in a year, you know, we'll go on and find our real jobs again. And that was really the mentality. It was just like a continuation of the project we were working on. Well, we knew nothing of fundraising. We knew nothing of how to, I didn't know what EBITDA meant. I didn't like throw any acronym out there. I didn't know what any of it meant. And we started to learn it all. And like when we sat around and signed the papers and sent to the state of Michigan, which we then did to change to Delaware, we had to learn all that. You know, we looked at each other and we were all technical co-founders. And I this is like, you know, verbatim. My co-founders sat and looked at me and they're like, well, you talk too much, so you're the CEO. And then they like, we're trying to figure out, well, the rest of us could be CTO. Everyone kind of wanted to be CTO because we're all technical people. And so I got pushed into that role. And then, you know, my other co-founders looked at each other and were like, well, Tom, you took 1 finance class, so you're the CFO. And then there was another one who was pursuing a PhD but hadn't gotten it yet. We're like, well, that would probably look good for investors, so you're the CTO. That all got shifted around. Tom is now the CTO, and we have hired a few different CFOs over the years. But we didn't really know what we were getting into when that all started. And I guess one gripe I have, and I've shared this very publicly, about incubators and accelerators and all that, raising money is always considered the goal. And you go into any incubator, and they're like, oh, how much money are you trying to raise? How much have you raised? And then you put out a press release. We've raised so many millions of dollars. I've always said, like, it's a means to an end. Now, the reason it is that way, and just to be clear, like, a lot of companies are successful because of funding. We could not have built drones. Like, we have a manufacturing facility west of town here. You can't do that without a lot of capital to go in. So there are capital-intensive businesses that need it. There are some that are not capital-intensive, and you should bootstrap. I wish bootstrap wasn't, you know, a vulgar word in this space, but I think often incubators and accelerators are driven by investors who, no offense to investors, need them to raise money to have a business themselves. And I think that needed to be a bit clearer in the early days. Now, granted, we raised money. We got totally screwed in our first round. We then fixed that later because we didn't know what we were doing. But I would say from the very, very beginning, we realized early on, venture capital, once again, in the best way possible, is like a drug. Once you're on the drug, The only way off of the drug is all the way through to an exit or dying the other direction. There is no middle ground. There is no like paying dividends and making venture capital happy, because that doesn't work for the venture capital math. And everyone else used to say venture math. We're like, what is venture math? Once we understood how venture capital is structured and why the math is the way it is, then we started to realize kind of where our place was. And we also, from the very early ages, realized our company, SkySpecs, is its own entity. We are employees of the entity we created. It is not us. We are not synonymous with it. And that really kind of freed us from that mentality of control versus, ownership or wealth, as we say. But surprisingly, all 5 co-founders are still at the company in year 13 now. So I think that mentality helped us stay
A different
around.
CFO, I hope.
Well, yeah, we did change CFOs a few times. All 4 co-founders, other than myself, have changed seats half a dozen times. At different stages of the company and different requirements that we had. They all kind of learned new things and shifted where the business needed them the most.
But none of them wanted your job.
No, I
Hasn't been able to give that
I
one
couldn't give it away. No. Yeah. So anyway, it's I think that mentality helped though from the very beginning.
Another fun thing that Danny shared with Wiebke and I when we were talking with him is that of the 5 founders, 4 of them were dating someone when the company started, and those 4 people have married those same partners and now have families. And the one guy who wasn't dating anybody still doesn't have a partner. So they track on a lot of levels here. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all that, Danny. So the next question is for our investors. Again, we're going to start with Sherwin this time. How do you evaluate a startup's potential for high financial returns, and do founders' preferences for control or wealth factor into that?
Yeah, so for me, I think like a lot of investors, it starts with the size of the market, right? I mean, how big is the market opportunity? Who else is kind of in the marketplace? And what are you doing that's unique? IP is always helpful, but there are business models, maybe I believe this because of commute, right? Where you can be competing on the business model itself, and you can have an opportunity well before others recognize it, right? So I always kind of start there with the size of the market. As far as the founder's view on wealth, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to have an idea of evaluation, and it is what it is. Either you will take it or you won't take it, right? And as you know, there's so many opportunities in the marketplace. If they don't want to take it, you'll find the next opportunity, right? And we've seen investors, startups come back to us over evaluation, right? That's the wrong hill to die on for me. That's my view on it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, David, go
Ask the
ahead.
question again.
How do you evaluate a startup's potential for high financial returns, and do the founders' preferences for control or wealth factor in?
So there's 2 big ways to do that, and Sherwin gave you the first one, which is top down, start how big's the market. I tend to work bottom up. How'd you make that first dollar? Okay, how you gonna make that dollar make you another dollar? How are you gonna make those 10 customers get you next 100 customers? Working up from 0 instead of down from a big number. And that's how you get to what their 5-year revenue is gonna be. There's all sorts of assumptions in there. And Gary and I have been around the block a few times on this, because those 5-year financials is a Kobayashi Maru test. It's a test of character. It's to see if you could actually manage such a thing. We are not going to hold you to this. No battle plan survives contact with the enemy. So once you're in market, you continue to ride that. And the math, the venture math that Danny talks about, it's a 58.8% internal return on investment. That's 10x in 5 years. You show me 10x in 4 years and you have my attention. You show me 20x in 5 years, I'm listening hard. And we're going to test the assumptions that went into that spreadsheet. How did you get that number? How did you get that number? We actually don't care how big the number is. We want to know the rigor that went into it. Because that is the measure of whether they have the rigor to actually achieve what they set out to do. Now, the second part of your question was the Richard King part.
Yeah, exactly.
And we make sure that they see our work. You know, you remember your grade school math, show your work on the multiplication table? We show them how we calculated the cash on cash return. And then they do the same math based on their equity. And now their equity is going to get diluted several times, and ours too probably, before they reach that exit. So they're learning sometimes for the first time what a cram down looks like, what a cap table really means at exit when the founding team have single-digit holdings because of them taking other people's money and other people's money. That drug that you're talking about, it's called OPM. Other people's money.
So basically, you're saying that if somebody's into control, they're probably not gonna go through that.
They're going to
whole
wash out of the
iteration.
math.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're going to do the math, and then they're going to decide to be organic, or they're going to put up terms that nobody will accept. So the other hard part of the math is that what we do as investors is down select, down select, down select. Just to get in our hopper, all these are good. They're all good. And most of the ones that we bet on are going to fail anyway. So how good are we at picking only winners? We're not. We're not.
Well, especially if, too many of us chase the theme, right? If I had $1 for every dollar lost investing on sustainability, I'd be rich, right? But what happens is the startup hears that lingo from investors, then they begin to repeat it.
Yep.
And so now all of a sudden we're all investing in the same thing, right? I was unfortunately caught up with a victim of SoftBank, right? Worst investors ever on the face of earth. That's just my,
So sorry.
probably shouldn't say that, but I'm saying it, right? But you got to be really careful. They have a lot of money, they can move the market. And then everybody begins to chase those metrics, but there's no underlying, real drivers of profits in that business model.
Right.
All right, now for the
Understood.
punchline. You heard of Sky Specs and you heard of Point Angels. Who's heard of Dave Brophy? All right, so what did Brophy teach? Entrepreneurs need to think more like investors. And investors need to think more like entrepreneurs. Comes back.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to come back to our survivor CEO here. What challenges have you faced, Danny, with investors over your decision-making authority, and how have you navigated these challenges? And I have on my little card, he might have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever. And it's different at every stage. In the early stages, the challenges were we were viewed as first-time entrepreneurs. And, another term that gets thrown around a lot in the early incubators and accelerators coming out of college. And we were told every step of the way, oh, when you go raise that next round of funding, that next round is full of sharks and they're going to replace you immediately. Like that's the process. So we raise our seed fund, and I'm told by the seed, investors, be careful of Series A, you're going to lose your seat. So we go into Series A, still have my seat. They're like, oh, next time you raise, it's going to be sharks. You're going to lose your seat. I hear this over and over and over again. And along those ways, yeah, there were changes that happened. But I think for us, we were fortunate enough, and obviously I think luck plays a lot into this, just like the timing. We came into the market at the right time. We were first to market in what we were doing. Obviously, renewable energy and sustainability has been hot. We didn't pick it because it was hot, but it certainly was hot while we were raising.
Picked it to win the award.
And and so we did have a bit of decision making in who we wanted around the table. We actually went and raised money from strategics when we were told stay away from strategics. We found good strategics that were very committed to using us, as a vendor to them, so they became our customers and our investors. But along that way, we built a board. We have a vast board. Well, this is a whole nother issue. There's like 18 people on my board, including observers, not all directors.
Sure you're not a nonprofit?
Yeah, I know. But it's a lot of strategics around the table, right? So they have value as customers.
Everybody, you get a seat.
Yeah, we don't have a room big enough for board meetings. But in that process, trying to align everybody from Series A to D, from VC to PE, from customer to financial focused only, there's a lot of opinions in the room. And one of the sticking points we had in the early days, well, I shouldn't even say early, mid days, to get in a little bit of detail on SkySpecs, we had become pretty much the global leader in flying a drone around a turbine blade. Super niche. Talk about like MVP. We were the best in the world at taking a picture of a tip of a turbine blade in the middle of Iowa, right? Like, that's what we were the best in the world at. And as we started to grow, we realized there's a lot more that goes into running a wind farm than just the health of the blades. So we could either build that part from the ground up, or we could look to partner, or we could look to acquire. And I started to share with my board that I wanted to go on this acquisition journey. And some of our investors were like, well, it's a really bad idea to tie a sinking ship to another sinking ship. It doesn't make it float. And we're like, yeah, we understand that analogy, but like it's been a lot harder to go build drivetrain analytics from the ground up when we don't have anyone in the room that knows what we're talking about in regard to drivetrain. And fortunately for us, the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden everyone is stuck at home. And I started to get these phone calls from other smaller companies in the industry that I knew their founders well. And they were saying, hey, can you help me fundraise? We're stuck in this European country. We can't travel. Investors can't travel. Investors weren't comfortable investing virtually yet. They were saying, we need to fundraise now, but I don't have the contacts. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I can help. And as I'm trying to help, I went back to our board and I was like, I think we should just buy them. Like, forget about them fundraising. Why don't we just acquire them? And we did two international acquisitions over an 88-day span that closed a week apart from each other in crazy time. But I had basically, proven to the board that this was going to be a faster way to grow our revenue, our footprint in the industry. We since bought a third company, so we've got bought one in Denmark, Ireland, and Austria, all virtually. And that was because the world was shifting to this like virtual mentality, and the timing really worked for us. But prior to that, that was not something in my tool belt that we were allowed to do or we had experience to do. We now have an in-house M&A team, at this point, and it is a part of the strategy. But yeah, for me, it came down, like, get back to the question of like problems. You're always dealing with 100 different opinions of your founders and of your team and of your investors, and there's no right answer. It's a variation of wrong. And the goal of my seat and the co-founders and executives around me is to figure out which wrong path to take, how to minimize the damage in that wrong path, and try to find the opportunity. And really at the end of the day, make the tough decision, which includes hiring and firing. And anytime you merge companies, there's overlap, so someone's likely going to be in a different seat or not in a seat at all. And those are difficult decisions to make. But ultimately, someone has to make them. So. Yeah, I mean, I could go into 100 different stories. If that's the first one that comes to mind of the matching to investor journey, we're talking about tonight.
Are the 3 CEOs still in their seats?
That's a very interesting question. No, but they're still here. So they're all in the company. My philosophy on M&A, if any of you are fortunate to be in this position, I find it to be a lot of fun. I don't like buying for the sake of firing. Right, so I don't look at it from like a synergy analysis. I don't want to buy a competitor and lay off half the team just to get the customers. I want to buy complementary businesses that accelerate us to different areas. And so the thesis that I pitched to these other CEOs was, you don't have to fundraise anymore. No, none of them like that. You come in on our product team and run that product as a product owner. We'll bring you the back office support, the global sales support, the global operations support, and you can focus on innovating what you set out to innovate. I meet a lot of CEOs who don't really want to be CEO. Like, once you get into the depths of what that means, they're like, I really like being a leader of product, whether that's tech focused or business focused or whatever. They like taking their idea to fruition. And so that was the pitch to them. 2 of them are still in that product seat, and the third we ripped out of his product seat and we made him our COO because he was really good at what he did. And we then ripped one of the other co-founders of that same business out and made him our CFO and head of our M&A team. So yeah, they are all the founders of all the acquired businesses, which was 8 people, are all still in the company. So back to the founder thing. Our 5 original founders and the 8 acquired founders are all in the company in some capacity.
That's pretty amazing. And I want to dovetail on what you said about a lot of CEOs don't really want to be the CEO. That leads us to our next clip from Peter here.
Eventually, businesses change, things evolve, whether it's the business landscape, fundraising landscape, the market just in general, all changed to a point where I personally felt overwhelmed. I felt it was more beneficial if I was able to find someone to replace me as CEO that had the experience of these changing markets.
So we're going to segue that to David and Sherwin again, asking the question, and David, you can start answering this one first. How do you handle scenarios where a founder may need to step down or may want to step down? And how do you support them in that transition?
Don't use Danny's verb, ripped. So this is the conversation that Sherwin and I begin before we invest, in getting to know and getting to understand why they do what they do, what they love to do, what they don't like to do. And you try in any of these difficult conversations to speak the other guy's language, to give it back to them, give them their message, give them your message wrapped in their wrapping. But your question is kind of, I like your two-part questions for one thing, Barbara, but the second part of the question presumes that these things happened in order. They don't. You've actually already engineered the transition before you have the conversation. You don't want to improvise at that moment. You want to be completely focused on the other person, on that empathy, on their needs, and be able to make this transition as easy as possible for the other person, because it's gut-wrenching. It's like what you were saying about least of evils. You know, there are lots of bad ways to do it. You try to pick the least bad way. There is no good way. There are only shades of bad. So rely on the humanity, know what the next step will be, and then use their language to tell them that next step. The successor actually has the more difficult task because they know before the principal knows. And that puts them in a very uncomfortable position. So timing, virtuality, the ability to manage the tempo of the conversation, all of these are these kind of high EQ skills that a lot of technical founders don't have. They have high IQ skills. They have high IT skills. But the EQ skills, good news, like the IQ, the IT, can be taught.
Yes.
So through this process of maybe not an 18-member board, but a board process where you actually, can play poker together, where you can have a family cocktail party or whatever, that's when your social energies, such as they are, all come into play, and they lubricate everything about your question, Barbara.
Cool. Sherman, you have the experience with Peter.
Yeah. So I think part of it was
successor.
Yeah. First of all, every CEO needs to find who in that boardroom can he have an honest conversation with, and it's seldom going to be a board director, right? I didn't know a lot about the angel market when I was asked by Ann Arbor Spark to review 4 mobility decks, and I did. I saw Commute, and I thought it was ahead of its time. But then I went on to learn that Peter was being given really bad advice by his board. And that's the first time I realized, as an institutional investor, the problem in our business was we all use the same documents. And so I got a lot of angel investors who think they know what they're talking about when they don't, right? And so, for example, Peter was being pushed to get sales. But I went out and visited the company. I met the people. And we didn't have a sellable product. So then I realized the board hadn't seen the product. And it wasn't until we did a grant-based deal out in Flint, where the governor got her 15 minutes of fame, and the mayor got his 15 minutes of fame, then the cameras leave, and I look at the product, and it didn't work, right? And I'm like, you're pushing the guy to get sales? But in that process, Peter learned that he could share with me. And we started having those conversations, and I was aware of some of his challenges. He started this as a mechanical engineer out of Kettering. Could have made good money in the auto industry, but he decided to do this. And by the time we get to year 3, Peter was tired. Yeah. So the idea of being the king, that went out the window. The idea of being the CEO, he wasn't so sure about that one either, right? And so we were able to have this conversation where he felt at least comfortable a few months ago to come to me and say, hey, I'm pretty done with this, right? And so I said, well, let's craft a plan. And so he and I came up with a plan before we even shared it with the board so that we could deliver for a few customers. There were things we needed to do. Because what wasn't going to happen is I wasn't taking millions of dollars of investors' money and just saying, well, you tried, let's hang it up. That wasn't going to happen. Because my money is in this company too.
And those investors,
So,
thank you for that.
Yeah, so. yeah.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much for that. We're going to hear Peter's side of it now. This is another quote from him about that situation.
I, sort of laid this out to, some of our investors and mentors. They sort of coached me on how to best go through this process so that way, again, Commute could live on without me or with me in a different position as my position changed over the years to, allow the company to still be successful.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I actually know Peter personally. He's the son of my partner's first cousin. So I pitch coached him when he was still at Kettering, and he was with his original team. So I have watched him through this whole arc. I've watched the maturity, actually. And from a very early point, I really found Peter to be quite self-aware. And I think Sherman would agree with that assessment. So it's also a matter of character when it comes right down to a lot of these decisions. So our next question is for Sherman and David again. After replacing this founder CEO, how do you approach, and Sherman, you can answer this one first. How do you approach retaining them in another capacity in the company? And I'm wondering if it's a very common solution to do that. I know it happened in the case of Peter.
Yeah, I think you have to begin to figure out what their skill set is and where could they be useful in the company. You also have to deal with the fact that what Peter did very creatively was use co-ops from Kettering. So he had a variable workforce, and they kept coming back. And so now here comes this guy. Fortunately, they had met me before, right? And so there was some degree of familiarity there. And so I knew that Peter had this vision about what he thought Commute was going to be. At the time he started it, micromobility was hot. Lime and others had raised millions of dollars, and they burned through millions of dollars. And before he knew it, the landscape shifted, right? And so one of the first things that I realized is that, Peter, maybe we're not a micromobility company. And of course he clutched his pearls. What do you mean, right? And so that was born out of he and I would have conversations with customers. And I would point out to him, not one customer mentioned sustainability. They mentioned fires, injuries, and deaths, right? And so I says, Peter, we're an infrastructure company. We're a prop tech company, right? And so it took him a little while to get his head around that. But so you have to manage, where did you put him?
Right.
He still had great product vision. We wanted to benefit from that. He was really creative to come up with products. So there was a way to do that with taking some of the stress of the day-to-day off of him.
And so CTO made sense.
Yes, it made a lot of sense.
In that sense. David, what would your insights be on that, replacing that founder CEO?
Two anecdotes. So first one, I'm an LP in a New Jersey fund. The company has a really dynamic CEO-led nutritional supplement company, also in New Jersey. And it's absolutely floundering. And we have conversations, the managing directors and the LPs, about what's going on in the portfolio, and they're very transparent. And they say, this is going to break up on the rocks. This is not going to happen. And I said, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? No good deed goes unpunished. They send me out to New Jersey. I spent a whole day doing discovery encounters with the CEO and the C-suite and the operations staff, and I find out, there's a gem in operations, director of operations. She gets it, she wants it, she's qualified for it, and I know that the investors will back her. And then I talked to the CEO, and his, I won't call him his heir apparent, but his go-to person is his wife, who's also in the business. And we're not going to get distracted by the whole family business. And he's like, I hate this. I just want to do what I do. All the CEO stuff that investors are asking us to do. And then she's beside him going, he's right. He's right. So I finish, do a all-night jag, build a deck, send it to the managing director in the morning. Managing director blesses it. We get back there in the morning, and I present the deck. And in the deck, I got the big reveal. CEO gets a promotion. Promotion is how we're selling this. And this is a term he kept using, so once again, using customer language, using his own language to sell this to him. He's going to be the brand ambassador. He's going to be the talking head on television because he likes the media part. He's going to be the guy in the cape. And Debbie from Ops is going to be the CEO. The wife screams and storms out of the room and starts calling investors. This went badly. A year later, they actually did this, but that was a very difficult year, during which time I was kind of firewalled off because they didn't want to talk to him again. End of anecdote 1. Anecdote 2, much better outcome. So I'm on a board of a California company, now a Michigan company, that has a CEO whose hand is in the cookie jar. Yeah, this guy's got to go. But the CEO owns key customer relationships. So we go to the CEO and we call him on the carpet and we say, you now have to transfer those relationships. Now this has happened in how many businesses in Michigan and elsewhere where you end up training your replacement? And your replacement might be in the next office, or they might be 10 time zones away.
Can we get to the punchline of this one?
I'm sorry, am I
We're
going on
just-
too long again?
Well, we're running out of time.
Oh, we're
so,
running out of time.
Yeah.
Okay, punchline. He tried to sabotage the transition. We ended up going around him to the customers. The new person took over for him and did much better than he did, and we didn't sue him, and so he gave up all of his options.
Oh my gosh. Ta-da. Thank you for sharing those stories.
But important point, now that Peter, for example, has resigned, and I made sure he resigned in writing, I've taken him out of all the day-to-day company operations, Slack channels, all of those things.
Which he hated.
You gotta make that clean break, right? You don't let him dabble. He's a board director, and that's where we'll keep him.
Yeah, and that kind of gets into the next question for you, absolutely. So you stepped into this role as non-founder CEO. It's your first time doing that,
Correct.
right? And so main challenges that you found as you did that for the first time? What were some of those?
Some of the biggest challenges is the fact that if I went back to the beginning, he didn't do as good a job at customer discovery. And so what he thought he was selling to, not everybody with money is your customer. You need to understand customer personas. Why are they buying it? And don't buy them because of what they want. Find out what a customer's problem is, not what they think they want. And once you understand the problem to be solved, it makes your value proposition pretty clear. And so commute today is really different from a commute simply 12 months ago.
Because you went and did that work.
Yes.
And they had never really done it.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
And discovery is really hard.
And that kind of comes to the second question for you, balancing and executing that founder's original vision. How do you balance that with making the changes you have to make? While Peter was still there, was that complicated?
That was a bit more of a challenge because you learn people's particular issues. So for example, changing the colors in the board deck, right? little simple things. Having an imprint on something about the business that he really values, but the customers didn't value it, right? And so one of the things I learned to do was plant a seed. I would mention something weeks or months before I actually was going to implement the change, right?
Yeah.
So that it wasn't as big of a shock to the
It could
system.
percolate,
We talked about this.
and you might come around to it. Okay.
Let's take the next question
Yeah,
for
Danny.
Danny, and then let's go to Q&A.
Okay, that's fine.
Because
Because we're
you all
jamming too
talk
much.
too
yeah.
much. It's way too interesting, and
It's
I
way
guess
too
our
interesting.
questions are way too good.
So, Danny, your question, you have been the CEO for 13 years, and you've gone through these 6 raises, and you're still the CEO, to the surprise of no one. Have you planned a future, and maybe you've planned it many times, where you would not be in charge? And what role would you want to take on if you could step down from the CEO role? Or if you had to, I guess.
I have not. Let me even back up a little bit earlier. The only thing I've planned is how to solve the next set of problems, and I think I'm going to add in some other advice here, that wasn't part of the question, but I hate the question that Blake got earlier. I forget who asked it. No offense that I hate the question of what's your exit plan. I was asked that like day 3 of founding the company 13 years ago, and I'm like, I just got here. I'm not planning on leaving. Now I get it, back to the venture math question, like that is the transaction that makes venture capitalists money, and there's a time window and you have to plan all that in, but like an exit for your investors doesn't necessarily mean you stop doing what you're doing. You might just be doing it for somebody else. Like once you've taken money, maybe you get bought out, maybe you get consolidated, who knows? You might still be solving the same problem. So back to the problem, or to the question, me and my co-founders from day one, we've said, what is the problem we're solving, and how do we best solve that problem? If best solving that problem means selling the company, hey, great, let's go solve the problem that way. If it means buying another company, if it means shifting seats, it's always focused on trying to solve the problem. So far, there hasn't been a moment where solving the problem best would be me doing something different. It's me continuing to take on the worst problems in the company. Because ultimately, when you get that big, that's what happens. The things that make it to my desk didn't get solved along the way, and that is what my role is. I view the CEO role, at least at this stage of our company, to make sure we're financially in a good position, make sure we're funded, and make sure I'm knocking down roadblocks for the rest of the organization. My strategy also was to always surround myself with people smarter than me and just get out of their way. It's like they're there for a reason. If I'm stepping in to solve their problem, then I hired the wrong person.
Right.
I want to not hear about it until there's a problem that I absolutely have to solve. And so, yeah, I haven't planned what else there would be. Also, I've never held another job, so I don't even really know. I don't even know what else I would do. But to your question, thinking about like if I was forced to be replaced, the answer to that would probably be different at every stage. If it were earlier, I could certainly see a transition to like a product or technology role or a brand ambassador role. At this stage of a company, I personally think that's too hard to do. Not because I wouldn't want to, but because I've seen it with others that I've mentored. If you keep the original around somewhere in the organization, a large part of the organization listens to them, regardless of whether they're supposed to or not. And that becomes challenging. We personally have not been through it, but I've mentored dozens of companies that have gone through similar challenges. And you have your actual reporting lines, and you have your dotted lines or phantom lines of what's actually going on inside of an organization. And I wouldn't personally want to make that happen.
Right.
And I've actually learned this the hard way, where others have come to me and said, hey, we're listening to what you said in that one meeting. And I was like, I didn't mean to say that. I was just talking, and they're like, yeah, but you said it. And I was like, I was just brainstorming, and they take it as gospel, and they go and do it. So I've had to be careful what rooms I walk into in our own company and what I say, because all of a sudden we're building a product that I was just like noodling on at one point, and the team has run with it, so it's hard to do that.
Well, maybe that,
Maybe
that
less.
sort of sets up what Sherwin was saying too about cleaning him out. You've got to make sure the
have to make
design's
that- yeah,
in paper and,
absolutely.
make it clean,
Yeah.
make a clean break. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to open this up for Q&A from the audience at this point, and then we'll ask you for a final comment.
Danny, curious about the acquisitions that were made. What kind of structure? Were they pure venture stage companies at the time, so you needed equity to do it, or were they combinations of debt and equity? How are they structured?
Yeah, all three were roughly Series A, early, low single-digit million revenue companies.
Okay.
So not no revenue, but not superly scaled. They had some investors in them, but not many. It was primarily a stock exchange deal.
Okay.
And so at the end of the day, it was all a relative valuation conversation, that we think we're this based on revenue or margin or whatever, and we're going to apply the same math to you, and then this is what the split is. At that stage, their products were way too early to like hand them cash and just hope they stay.
Yeah.
So we're like, you're going to be on this journey with us.
Handcuffs.
They weren't even golden handcuffs. They're just
No, they're just plain
iron
handcuffs.
handcuffs.
Yeah.
We did use a
Equity deal.
little bit of cash to like remove some of the investors, that didn't want to go on the journey.
Sure.
But yeah, they were acqui-hires, for the most part, and not cash deals.
Okay, curious.
Other questions from the audience?
How much money had you raised when you decided to go buy companies?
Yeah, so at the time, little quick math, 40 million had been raised for the first two. And then that actually was really an interesting story. As soon as we put that into the press, my phone started blowing up. And phone calls from private equity all over the place. And I was like,
once you want it.
yeah, and I was like, why? I kept asking these private equity groups, why are you calling? And they're like, well, we have way too much money that's dedicated from our LPs to sustainability, and we don't have enough mature companies to put it in, so we're looking for consolidation plays. And they're like, you've started it with these two acquisitions, so we want to pile more money in, and like all these groups are calling.
They think you're singing their song.
Yeah, exactly. And we ended up raising money from Goldman Sachs. We raised an $80 million round next, so 120 in total by the time we did that third acquisition. But like I said, we put the press release out because I learned the hard way earlier. If you don't, someone else will. Right? They followed the SEC filings, and someone will put out a completely wrong article about why you raised and what you're doing, and they'll make it all up. And so we were like, okay, we have to put out our own article to control the story. But I can't stand touting fundraising, right? Like, I'd be so much happier sitting here saying we bootstrapped this to this level. Instead, we've had the burden of raising 120 million, and now we have to exit for much, much, much larger than that. So, yeah.
On the ride. On the ride.
Yeah, gotta be a
Yes.
unicorn.
Okay. Really great discussion. So thank you so much, all four of you. Danny, there's a question for you. And so much of what this whole conversation revolved around, as I took it, is in an unspoken way about ego.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of ego, not to put a judgment on it, but there's a lot of ego in business leadership and startup leadership. And the question of how to juggle positions or remove somebody from a position of power or influence in an organization gracefully is there's a lot to consider there. But Danny, you said something that I don't think I've ever heard anybody say before, which is the best thing that you can do is to recognize that the business is not yours,
Yes.
and it's not any of ours, and it's not intrinsically tied to who we are, which is difficult for a lot of startup founders in particular to understand,
That's the ultimate ego.
especially first-time
My business.
founders. There's a tendency to associate ourselves and our self-worth and identities with our businesses. But what I heard in that statement that you were getting at is the idea that as a leader, you're a steward of the cause. And I've never heard anybody articulate it like that before, and I appreciate that. And I'm curious, did that come naturally to you? Is that something you developed over the years? Were you born like that? Have you felt that way in other projects that you've led?
Is it in your DNA?
Are you even aware that that is a unique sentiment or perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting. Few ideas around that. First off, if you read my LinkedIn, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I was an aerospace engineer. Like, I wanted to go build planes, right? I didn't want to do this journey. I was in the right place at the right time. I saw an opportunity to try it, so I went after it. My goal was, I also can't stand the term serial entrepreneur. If I do it again, cool, maybe not, who knows? But I was always told back to that, like, first-time entrepreneur, like, oh, you're a first-time, like, you're a freshman. When you graduate to your like fourth failure, then you'll be considered a real entrepreneur. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, so like that I wasn't on that journey. I also personally, this is a weird room to say this in, I don't think entrepreneurship is a career. I think entrepreneurship is a tool to solve hard problems in the industry, in all industries. And it's okay to call yourself an entrepreneur, but I find it a little comical when someone comes to me like, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't have an idea yet. I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but I know I'm an entrepreneur. I'm like, well, first focus on a problem you want to solve and go do that. Once you focus on that, you might join a company, maybe you do it a different way, and maybe you become an entrepreneur. So I think from my perspective, that wasn't the goal. And so it was a little easier for me to walk into it saying like, I am a part of this journey. Like I had 5 co-founders. We all felt ownership. There was also a moment in time when we were around 50 or so employees that I recognized. We had like a Christmas party one year, and I recognized they all felt ownership of it as well. Like a lot of people had been around a long time, weren't founders, but they'd been with the organization a long time, and they felt as much ownership as I did. And so it is a collective, kind of ownership mentality. But to your question, like, do I know this about myself? There were a few things I recognized about my upbringing much later in life that I correlated to some of the success. I played a lot of sports growing up, and particularly I played baseball. And if you know anything about that, like, if you are failing 70% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame. It's like that mentality of like losing all the time, whether it's striking out or making an error or whatever, like that was in my blood all the way up, and I had correlated a lot of that in business as well. And similarly, like I was primarily a pitcher, and I want to get back to another thing I want to correlate here. I was a pitcher, and pitchers get credited with the win in baseball. You don't get the win unless your team hits, they field the ball, like everything else happens, but the pitcher gets the credit. And I find it similarly in entrepreneurship. I've won a lot of awards. I've won from NEF. I've been Entrepreneur of the Year for the state of Michigan. A few other awards along the way. There's a whole bunch of these like weird glass things sitting up in our office, and they all have my name on them. I'm not the one that did 99% of the work that put SkySpecs where it is. I wish it just said SkySpecs wins the award for Company of the Year or whatever, and it wasn't always the CEO. And I think we've got this culture driven by Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all the others, that it's like, oh, the CEO started it, and they had the grit to program every line item in there, and they're the ones that made it successful. And we don't credit the teams at all, if not enough.
Absolutely.
And so I correlate that to like my upbringing in baseball too. It's like I always felt weird, like the pitcher gets the win, the CEO gets the award, they forget about the team, and it's all about the team. So I'm correlating that to my history.
If I can make a quick comment, the idea is to stay or go. What you were talking about is leadership, right? And for me, some technical people start businesses, but they're not always leaders, and they can't see themselves doing anything beside that skill. I've kind of specialized in managing high-performance teams. I got Stefan here, who was a student in my class when I was teaching at Eastern, who I ran into years later and hired. He's still at GM Ventures, right? You got to develop talent, right? And that's what I think you're really good at doing.
Wonderful. We're going to stop the questions there and just ask each of our panel members in a sentence to
We
say
can't
what.
do one sentence.
Yeah, this is pretty obvious, actually. This is pretty obvious.
Couple sentences.
Fail.
A run-on sentence.
A run-on sentence, but just advice that you would give to a founder, a newer founder, early CEO of, or somebody even thinking about starting an enterprise. What would your advice be around this whole stay or go topic?
For me, is to take some kind of personality test. You need to kind of understand where your strengths are up front, and most of us don't really do that.
So like a strengths finder?
Yeah, you really need to do that to figure out where your strengths are. There are certain founders who are good from C to A, certain can be A to C, some can do it all the way. But that's going to be based upon really understanding your strengths.
Great advice. Yeah.
Take your mic.
One of the things that I look for in one sentence is fail shame. How do you accept when it didn't happen the way you wanted it to? don't take the word fail out of it, and actually take the word shame out of it, and just say, how did that feel? Was that okay? Were you bouncing off of that like a pinball? Were you taking the lesson back to the next thing you did and the next thing you did? Were you using that scar tissue to make yourself stronger, or are you going to beat yourself up? You're going to like point the finger and play the blame game? Are you going to like make it worse, basically?
So no, it's self-awareness around how.
They might not actually be aware, Barbara, but if they feel even a hint of that fail shame, and this goes to the stay or go, they're not going to be Danny. They're not going to stay the course.
Yeah.
70%. Rock star.
And Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said a lot of my advice here, but it's not a zero-sum game. For you to win doesn't mean someone else has to lose. And because you've had a failure doesn't mean you've lost. Some of our biggest failures in our journey, I'll tell you, I lost 20% of our cash in the bank on a bad deal that we had in the early days, and I thought it was over. And we used that to learn and propel into our next giant contract, and made a lot of money. It's focus on solving the problem. That's my biggest advice. Be passionate about the problem. Find the people to help solve the problem. Don't get distracted from solving the problem. Everything else will work itself out.
And knowing your problem. That's,
And know your problem. Yeah.
that's really
Find
key.
the problem.
We don't have
Focus
time
on
to
that.
play the clip from Peter, but we did ask him that question. And as a technical founder who started out really young, his advice was to get business help quicker. And particularly sales. And when I said that to Sherwin, he was like, well, he needed a little bit before the sales. But he did recognize at the end of the journey that he should have done that quicker. So we'll just say that at the end. We want to thank our panelists for taking their time this evening. Thank you so much, gentlemen. A very lively discussion, as we knew. I want to thank Vipka for being such a great partner in crime. We've had a lot of fun putting this together. And our tech team for making all of our song happen. We really wanted that music. And Peter's clips as well. And thank you all for being here this evening. We hope you enjoyed and got something from this conversation. So thank you very much.
Big round of applause.